Welcome to the 18th National Black Writers Conference Awards Ceremony. I'm Donna Hill, Executive Director for the Center for Black Literature, and we are beyond pleased to have you all here today to honor Imani Perry, Kashahun Chakol, and Camille Dungy for their outstanding contributions to the Black literary landscape. This year's conversations have surrounded and been centered on expanding conversations on environmental justice, popular culture, resilience, and peace. We look to the voices across the Black diaspora that have synthesized these concepts and infused them into their work. Whether it was in a novel about a world where white people simply walked into the water and the Black people left behind faced a new world they could recreate, or the story of a place nearly lost in history that had a Black queen on American soil. The censorship and banning of our books, poets that awakened our spirits to all that we are and can be, the scholarly panelists that open our minds to environmental racism, digital surveillance, reggae music against ecological ruin, our students who answered the question, how does popular culture influence social thought into action and activism? Our elders who shared stories of their migration and the gentrification of communities. Our young people who reminded us of who and what we must do to leave a better place for them. Our historians that offered the unvarnished truth about the whitewashing of Black history, and so much more. That has been what this conference has been about. In deciding on this year's theme, our goal was to engage the wider community on the real-world challenges that plague us now through the magic of literature. We can find answers, respite, hope, enlightenment, and entertainment. We were thrilled to have an amazing array of writers with us during the conference to bring our vision to our community. Our work at the center is multi-layered and multi-generational. We hope that you've had the opportunity to take advantage of all that we have offered to you this weekend. And we invite you to join us next year for our National Black Writers Symposium, where our topic will be the evolution of Black women across the literary diaspora in celebration of Gloria Naylor. And now, before we get started with our conversation, I would like you to join me in welcoming Medgar Evers, Dr. Evelyn Castro, Senior Advisor to the President for Community Engagement, Dean, School of Professional Community and Development, and a true friend and champion of the Center for Black Literature.
So, good evening, everyone. So, on behalf of the Medgar Evers College president, Dr. Patricia Ramsey, who was just in this room walking around hugging all of our great people that are here tonight, including Esmeralda Simmons, I have to acknowledge you. I'm here to bring you a greeting and a welcome. I'm proud to do this and honored to be here with you because of what this stands for, number one, and number two, because Dr. Patricia Ramsey is the first woman president in 50 years at Medgar Evers College and a scientist. So we're proud to host this powerful gathering of writers, scholars, and thought leaders whose voices continue to shape, challenge, and uplift our communities. This year's theme, Empowering Conversations on Environmental Justice, Popular Culture, Resilience, and Peace, reminds us of the vital role that literature plays in confronting injustice, which we live with every day, and imagining new possibilities for our future. And reflecting on the life's work of John Oliver Killens, who wrote A Life of Black Literary Activism, I'd like to stop for a minute and tell a personal story if you would let me. I told this to Dr. Green the other day. I'm a Brooklyn girl, born in Brooklyn. My mother came up from Hampton University on a summer vacation as a junior and met a very charming Jamaican man. So I'm rice and peas and candied yams, right? But in New York City, going to public school here, if you were accelerating, oftentimes they skipped you. So I was skipped once. First they tried to put me in upper class, and I was skipped. And I came to this community in Crown Heights. I was the only black girl in my class, and I met another girl who joined the class later. She was short in stature, but very, very lovely, and we were quiet because we were younger than everybody else, but we could do the work. So that's what they did then, they just skipped you. And so I would walk home from school with her, right? Even I came from Bed-Stuy, this is Crown Heights. And when we would walk home, we would go into her house, and her father was always very kind to us. And I noticed my house had books, but her house had books all around the wall. And to me, he was just my friend's father. I didn't know his name. I mean, I didn't call him Mr. I would say, good afternoon, and he would say, okay, girls, get to work. And every once in a while, he would give us a book to read. When you finish your homework, do this. Later, years later, I found out that her dad's name was John Oliver Killens, right? So, yes. And what we have to tell our young people day after day, they are living in history. This is a school that has housed Dr. Betty Shabazz, that has housed, and I'm so happy she's here, Dr. Brenda Green, who has that history. So I'd like to extend special recognition to Dr. Green, whose visionary leadership helped build the Center for Black Literature into the institution it is today, a jewel for the whole United States and the world. Your legacy continues to inspire us, and we equally are excited to recognize Dr. Donna Hill, who is certainly up to the challenge, as the new director of the Center for Black Literature, and we look forward to your leadership to carry on this important work. I've been here every day. I've been buying things, buying books, and I want to recognize Charlotte Hunter, the Chief of Staff, and her team. They did a great job, right? So to all of our presenters, our honorees, and attendees, thank you for being here and for contributing to a tradition that celebrates the brilliance and resilience and enduring impact of Black literature. Welcome and enjoy this remarkable evening. Thank you.
Now, where was I? This conference would not have been possible without the tireless work of the Center for Black Literature staff. I continue to be amazed by how much they accomplish with so little. I am honored to work with Chief of Staff and Director of Development and External Affairs, Charlotte Hunter, wherever Charlotte is. Director of Operations and Literary Programs, Amber Magruder, who could not be here with us, but she's with us in spirit. And Executive Assistant Leah Bird, who keeps everything moving. I would not be able to function without Leah and all of her help. Our consultants, Mara Prater, who oversees the Roll Program, Issa Richardson, who oversees the Dr. Edith Rock Writing Workshop for Elders, our Medgar Evers College Communications and IT departments, facilities and reservations, our dedicated steering committee members who have jumped in on so many levels to make this event happen, and of course, our advisory board. While today is certainly the result of hard work and dedication of a mighty team effort, we would not have crossed the 20-plus year threshold without the vision, determination, and guidance of the Center for Black Literature's founder and executive director, Emerita, Dr. Brenda Green. I am pretty sure everyone in this room knows personally or knows of Dr. Brenda Green and the work that she has done in and out of Medgar Evers College and for the center Her advocacy in the name of literature is unparalleled. It was her vision that 2 years ago conceptualized this year's theme. I will forgo her extensive bio and ask if we can give Dr. Green a round of applause for all she has done for the college and for the Center for Black Literature. Thank you. Charlotte Hunter, where are you? Charlotte. We have some proclamations that were given to us on behalf of some of our political partners who have been so supportive of our work. And Charlotte, whenever we grab her, is going to present those. Where'd she go? Okay, so we'll do this. No, those are for later. Okay. We have a proclamation from the New York State Senate, Senator Kevin Parker from the 21st Senate District, honoring the Center for Black Literature at Medgar Evers College, dated March 27, 2026, and this is his proclamation. And from the House of Representatives, the United States House of Representatives, from Congresswoman Yvette Clarke, presents the 18th National Black Writers Conference, a proclamation on behalf of the State Senate. So, and we have some other treats later on. So, never mind, Charlotte. Okay, so now I am pleased to introduce our moderator for the evening, Medgar Evers' very own Laurie Daniel Favors, Esquire. Laurie serves as Executive Director at the Center for Law and Social Justice. She's an activist and attorney with a long-standing commitment to racial and social justice. Ms. Daniel Favors earned her JD from New York University, where she was a Root Tilden Kern Public Interest Scholar. She graduated from Pennsylvania State University with a BA in African and African American Studies with a minor in Spanish language. Ms. Daniel Favors started her legal career as an attorney in the New York offices of Proulcaster Rose LLP and Manat Phelps and Phillips LLP. She also served as federal court law clerk in the chambers of the Honorable Sterling Johnson Jr. in the U.S. District Court for Eastern District of New York. She later founded Daniel Favors Law PLLC, a law firm that focused on economic and racial justice. Before completing law school, Ms. Daniel Favors co-founded Sankofa Community Empowerment, Inc., a nonprofit organization designed to educate, empower communities of African descent. She later co-founded Breaking the Cycle Consulting Services, LLC, which specializes in creating comprehensive professional development for educators, youth education programs, and family engagement workshops designed to address the crisis in urban education through the use of culturally responsive teaching. Ms. Daniel Favors hosts the Laurie Daniel Favors Show on Sirius XM, Urban View Channel 126. She is a contributing author to The Birth of a Nation, Nat Turner and the Making of a Movement. She also penned Afro State of Mind, Memories of a Nappy-Headed Black Girl, a coming-of-age story about a Black girl fighting to find her place in a world where her hair texture and skin color did not fit the accepted beauty standards. Through an examination of the history of African textured hair and racism, Ms. Daniel Favors identifies Black hair, identity, skin color, and self-esteem as areas that are ripe with potential for personal and political power. But most of all, she's a proud member of Delta Sigma Theta sorority. Please welcome tonight's moderator, Lurie Daniel Favors.
Thank you so much. Can we please give another round of applause to the Center for Black Literature for this amazing convening? Absolutely amazing convening, and I am so excited about the conversation we are going to have this evening. Now, as I shared with our panelists, throughout the night you will see me looking down at my phone, but that's because that's where my questions are. I am not violating rules of protocol. I just want to let you all know that, so we're all in on this together, because tonight is truly a special event, and I would not want anything to detract from the amazing conversation that I'm looking forward to having with the three of you. So I'm going to introduce you in order of seating, and thankfully you all are as excited about this as I am, so let's get into it, shall we? First, we have Camille T. Dungy, the author of Soil, The Story of a Black Mother's Garden. Soil was named Book of the Month by Hudson Booksellers, received the 2024 Award of Excellence in Garden and Nature Writing from the Council on Botanical and Horticultural Libraries, and was on the shortlist for the Penn John Steen Award. She's also written 5 collections of poetry, including America, A Love Story, Trophic Cascade, a winner of the Colorado Book Award, and an essay collection, Guidebook to Relative Strangers, Journeys into Race, Motherhood, and History, a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award. Let's see, she edited Black Nature, 4 Centuries of African American Nature Poetry, the first anthology to bring African American environmental poetry to national attention. And there are about 3 additional paragraphs of your amazing bio, so I'm going to allow all of you to read those bios so that we can get into the meat of the conversation. Seated next to her is our amazing second panelist this evening, Kasahun Chikol, the founder and president and publisher of Africa World Press and the Red Sea Press, with a mission to publish books on the history, culture, and politics of Africa and the African diasporas. Formerly at Rutgers University and El Colegio de Mexico, he's the recipient of many academic honors and equally numerous recognitions for his activist work. And seated next to me is Imani Perry, the Henry A. Morse Jr. and Elizabeth W. Morse Professor of Studies of Women, Gender, and Sexuality of African and African American Studies at Harvard University, and the Carol Forsheimer Professor at Harvard Radcliffe Institute, the author of 9 books, including the New York Times bestseller South to America, A Journey Below the Mason-Dixon to Understand the Soul of a Nation, which received the 2022 National Book Award for Nonfiction. Her most recent book, Black in Blues, How a Color Tells the Story of My People, published in January of 2025, and she's written for numerous publications, including the New York Times, The Atlantic, The Bitter Southerner, Harper's, and Harper's Bazaar, and we are all eagerly awaiting the wisdom that each of you are going to be sharing with us this evening. Can we please give our 3 panelists a round of applause? So I'd like to start with you, Ms. Camille. If you could talk with us this evening. The theme has been quite intense when it comes to environmentalism, environmental justice, and resilience. And when we think about those themes as they present themselves throughout the Black world, we're often talking about Black suffering at the hands of a capitalist ecosystem, destructive institutions, and the individuals that run them. Can you talk with us this evening about the role that Black literature, poetry, and other literacies play, and not just in identifying these harms, but in empowering us to resist them?
Thanks for that question. Thank you, all of you, for being here. And this whole convening, as you say, has been just really wonderful to be part of. And I think the question of resistance, of reframing, has come up in the panels that I've been to, because this is at the core of what creativity requires of us, right? Creativity is asking us to see the world again and to see a future and a past that is a space of survival. And so one of the most important things for me to think about when I talk about the intersection for Black Americans between questions of social justice and environmental justice is the ways that the greater than human world has so frequently been a source of strength, a source of resilience, of respite, of just straight up joy, right? I think often of a poet and activist named Ann Spencer, who lived in Lynchburg, Virginia, didn't leave Lynchburg, Virginia, but is in the stamp collection of the Harlem Renaissance writers because her writing, which often connected to her garden that she grew, was so important a space of rest for all those folks going up and down Highway 29, needing a place in the Jim Crow South where they could rest, where they could eat, where they could bathe, where they could laugh, where they could relax. And she made a space of beauty and comfort and splendor and wonder and kept doing the work. In fact, kept doing the work partially because she had this space of beauty and respite. And so to write into those histories and out of that space of just demanding love and beauty and joy through a connection with the living world feels like one of the most important charges for a writer of the Black diaspora.
You know, sticking with that theme, Professor, I wonder if you can talk with us a bit about the way in which the connection between nature, lived experience, and oppression and resistance show up within Black literacies throughout the diaspora. I'm very interested because we're seeing now almost a repeat of so many historical themes of neocolonialism reestablishing itself, domination over the land and over the resources that are often held in Black lands. Talk to us a bit about the way that these themes present themselves in your writing and what your hopes are as it pertains to how writers will continue grappling with these topics moving forward.
I think that was me?
Oh no,
Yeah.
Professor Chikol.
It's an amazing thing that yesterday we had a wonderful panel on AI and technology. And among my colleagues, we were talking about the effect on AI, technological development, on the world as a whole, particularly when it questions about the environment, in particular water.
Yes.
Already, we have several countries in the world that are running out of water.
Yes.
Why? Because our big billionaires are building their cooling systems for the AI system in those countries,
Right.
particularly in Latin America and in Africa. And some of our foolish leaders who call themselves economic development people are inviting these people to come in and build these systems. So in Latin America, one country is totally water,
Bankruptcy.
bankruptcy,
Yeah.
essentially bankruptcy. In Africa, growing numbers of countries are South Africa, Ethiopia, Ghana, Ivory Coast are now giving their land and their space and their precious water to this technology. To me, that is a self-made disaster because eventually the people who are going to pay that price are the ordinary farmers and people. So the environment is a critical issue that we need to look at when we write and when we publish. I think we have to be particularly interested in advocating against this kind of new imperialism, new colonialism.
Yeah. And I'll be more specific when I say professor next time, as I'm sitting on a panel with all professors.
I appreciate it.
Professor Perry, continuing with the theme of AI and the way that artificial intelligence is really helping to shape popular culture, we're in a time now where you can essentially replicate Black sounds and Black images without a single Black person touching the technology or benefiting therefrom. And when you consider the role that, the very destructive role that this technology also has when it comes to our physical communities, thinking about the South, the American South currently, and considering the fact that there is almost, in some ways, an effort to get more and more Black people to consider moving to the South, relocating to the South. That's where the largest numbers of our community members currently live. There's a sense that there is political power where we have geographic proximity. And yet, the American South is also one of the places that is frankly, the most unprotected when it comes to environmental and ecological threats. Cancer Alley, for example, the oversaturation of those very data centers that Professor Chacol just referenced. When we're thinking about the way that our artistry is a source of resistance as much as it is a source of empowerment and awakening our imaginations. When we're thinking about these contrasts and the way that what's happening in the American South, as just described, is also being replicated throughout the world, as Professor Chacol just outlined, talk to us a little bit about the role of Afrofuturism when it comes to imagining what the world looks like moving forward through our art, through our writings, through our cultural expressions, in light of these tensions that we seemingly are not necessarily on the best footing as it pertains to pushing back.
Yeah, I mean, that's okay. So I want to begin just by saying how wonderful it has been to be here today and for part of yesterday. It's such an extraordinary gathering and such an honor to share the stage with my co-panelists. You know, how am I going to answer that question? I was born in Birmingham, Alabama in 1972. And I often say, home is where your dead are buried. And that's where my dead are buried, in the state of Alabama. My children are the first who were born in my line north of the Mason-Dixon line, and I descend from people who were enslaved in the colonial period, so I can reach back to the early 1700s. And so there is something about modernity itself, right? The modern period, the age of conquest, the age of domination, which distorted the relationship between human beings and the land. And that distortion took the form of the kind of violent subjugation, exploitation, suffering, premature death, and also devastation of the land, right? There's a deep connection between the two. And in this country, and there are iterations of this all over the world, and one of the things that I wrote about in South to America, I end in the Caribbean because the Caribbean and the U.S. South were the same region historically. And there's something in this country about the South that, in part because the majority of Black folks have been there, but also in part because when the European empires came there, they were captivated by the abundance of the landscape and wanted to take control of it, and were willing to push people out, kill people, degrade people, right? Destroy in the service of wanting to harness that abundance. And because of the climate historically, right, and also that's the reason why the institution of slavery lasted much longer. That's the reason why that's where it's always been the case that the majority of Black people in this country are in the U.S. South. That is actually, it's the crossroads space of this nation, right? It's like, being in the room where it happened. That's this place where it happened. And that's where when I say in this specific, my we is usually Black people in general, but in this particular instance, we as Black Americans are created in that space because we are created from all these various sort of forms of African ancestry and also some European and indigenous ancestry, but largely multiple African ancestries, that because that's the site, right? And therefore that is both the site of incredible devastation and cruelty, but it's also the site of the imagination, as you said. And so when I talk, I'm not an Afrofuturist in terms of any kind of academic sense, but I always say, the person who was enslaved and gave birth to a child and loved them, that is an Afrofuturist proposition, right? Because there's this idea of some possibility, right? Yes. And so I think that that's sort of where we we remain, and I don't mean that we're in the identical circumstances as we were, 200, 300 years ago, but what I mean is that we continue to both live with the proximity of the ugliness that the modern era created. That is why we're okay with data centers that are destroying, right, destroying our landscape, right? It's the same thing. This is why, for me, George Washington Carver is so heroic, because he's not just trying to do something for poor black folks, but he's also trying to heal the land in Alabama. That I think, we are still charged with that same responsibility, and there's something very particular, it's not unique, but there's something particular that happens in the South because of the confrontation with history that's so immediate, including the dead in the soil.
You know it's a good panel when the moderator is pensive over the comments that are being received. Professor Dungy, I'd like to come now back to you, because when we're talking about relationship with the land, one of the dichotomies that we experience is this thing that happens for those of our family members who came from the South, came up into more urban centers. Now those of us who descended from those travels and those migrations, many of us are now trying to reestablish a connection with the land. How many wannabe urban farmers are trying to figure out how to get some herbs to grow in your windowsills or on your fire stoops? There's a lot of us who, are now enchanted again with this idea of reconnecting with the land. As we see the world begin to do what the world is doing in response to political matters, that necessity, and as people think about food shortages and the need for purified water, all of these things become much more present of mind. And yet we have the physical lack of access to land that is itself its own barrier. When you think about your explorations of nature and the way that nature is something that is at once, yes, a space of joy and a space of peace, but also a space of strength and a space of, it's a very utilitarian space in that we are able to draw strength from it. We're able to gain insight from it. Yes, I'm a granola black girl, so forgive me. But can you speak with us a bit about the challenges that those who are physically separated, just because of the geography in which we live, from the land, the importance of accessing literacies like the ones you have helped to contribute to this body of work, so that we can cultivate that love, tap back into that ancestral epigenetic transfer, if you will?
Yeah, I think it's also a space of all the things you named, but also a space of continuity. This idea of people in New York trying to grow little urban gardens is not new. Right? There's nothing new about it. I know so many people who talk about their grandmothers wanting to have a house plant or a pot of tomatoes or some herbs, and just go out there and get some basil from right? This is not new. What may be new is an insistence on naming this, right? An insistence on claiming this connection as something that is valued and valuable for Black people in America. So when I collected the Black Nature Anthology in 2009 was when that book was published, almost 20 years now, and there were two polarly opposite responses when I requested poems from people. And one response was, I'm not really a nature poet. Why would you want this? And then I would sort of say, well, this is a poem about your grandfather having conversations with trees. I feel like that is a version of environmental connection. I would really love that poem in my anthology, right? And then the other one was people like Yusef Komunyakaa, people like Lucille Clifton, saying, thank you. I have been doing this work my whole life, my whole career, and nobody had ever thought of me in this light. And the very act of including poems like that inside pages and just labeling it a nature poem means that all of a sudden all these other people are seeing Lucille Clip. I don't know how you can read a book like Magic City by Yusef Komunyakaa and not understand that person as an environmentally engaged writer. But you were talking about the fact that he was talking about the mill pond, and he was talking about labor, and he was talking about all of this environment, this degradation, and the political, economic constructs of being a Black person in America, almost all of which have some ecological, environmental tie, right? So being able to consciously name the continuity of our connections gives power with all things. This is why we always say it's really important to know your history, because you don't know your future if you don't know your history, right? It's really important to know how you're rooted in the earth, because if you don't know how you're rooted in the earth, you don't know how you're gonna grow out from it and up from it. And it doesn't, like, the being in the urban space is not a limitation against it, right? I just remember hearing from so many of my New York friends when the shutdown happened, and you all became birders, like, quick, right? Like, all of a sudden, people are out here naming birds and like talking about the trees that they saw in the park and the flowers. You just slowed down a second, right? You slowed down a second and you were able to see these connections that were there all along. And many of the people who got that moment of insight didn't stop when everything sped up again, right? It's just asking the moment of stoppage. And so that's the role of the writer, that's the role of the editor, that's the role of the anthologist, that's the role of the professor, is helping people slow down and see what they had already been seeing but not acknowledging necessarily.
Thank you.
Professor Chicole, I'd like to have a conversation briefly about surveillance, because it's not lost, I think, on anyone here that the increased levels of surveillance that we are witnessing in this country, the global levels of surveillance that are increasing, have a lot to do with these data centers and with this artificial intelligence. And so the idea that we are now being ever more watched and observed and analyzed and studied for the purposes of algorithms and for the purposes of generating commerce, and the connection between that surveillance and the capacity for that surveillance being tied to the degradation of the land is something that I think is poetically awful. When you think about the way that the world right now is being sort of steered into embracing these technologies, which, and I'm not trying to be a dinosaur. I know AI has some good properties. I'm sure they're there, and I'm sure they're abundant, and someone else can speak to that. But when it comes to how we are currently in a moment where humankind is almost being pushed into embracing these technologies, which are extraordinarily harmful to the environment. And that pushing also has the added impact of placing us ever more under surveillance from those who benefit from the destruction of the planet. When you consider the role of the writer to help us tackle that, help us talk through what that means in light of what we're seeing, not just in this country, what we're seeing internationally as well.
Well, let's place it in context. AI, like other technologies, is an intelligence instrument. Every word we say and we write is now recorded in a database. So Microsoft is stealing our words, our knowledge, everything that we do to mitigate the possibility of having more information to sell back to us.
Yeah.
So I want to go back in history a little bit. Why did people go to Africa and other countries to bring enslaved people here? They didn't go to Africa to bring impoverished, ignorant, disabled, unworking people. They went there because they saw intelligence. The intelligence to till your land. The intelligence to survive, to be able to pass generations of generations without the kind of devastating technology that we're using now, particularly the so-called fertilizer industry.
Yes.
So before people become to talk about composting and what have you, we lived with that. every generation. We didn't have to buy genetically engineered materials from some of the richest people like Mr. Gates in order to plant our next crop of food. We knew how to preserve them. We knew how to replant them and go on forth. So they brought intelligent people to this part of the world. To do what? To do farming for them. Okay? To teach them what to produce and how to produce it. And they did an excellent job, as you can see. But to maintain that, they have to engage in this process of enslavement. But particularly in the enslavement of the mind.
Yes.
More than anything else. The physical part, we come and go. All of us do. But our historic intelligence is not something you can just throw away. So the first thing they do was to strip us of our knowledge base. Now they're collecting knowledge base. But first they strip. I was wondering in historical sense, when they sent people to Africa originally, who did they send? They sent missionaries. Those missionaries did a good job in one, taking, the most important thing they did was study our languages. Most of the dictionaries in Africa were written by missionaries. You'll be amazed how much wealth they collected. Wow. It's worthwhile, it's good, I have nothing against it, but it was for the purpose of empowering the empire. So the empire knows about who we are and what we do. And at that point, that decisions are made on how to act next. So Africa lives, Asia lives, Latin America lives, because they still maintain their knowledge base. In the United States, one of the first things I noticed is that people are lost.
Wow.
Essentially, they were not recognizing themselves, for example, as Africans.
Yeah.
They were willing to accept themselves as Negroes. They were willing to accept themselves as blacks. So the identity is, you don't go around saying, I am a white man. You go around saying, I'm an Irishman. I'm an Italian man. Okay? You associate yourself with land, where the source of wealth and property originally comes off. It is only the African in the United States who does not identify himself or herself with the origin. So to change that, intelligent people like Du Bois, like Woodson, and others said, we have to educate our people about where they came from and what they did. All his life, Du Bois emphasized on the significance of Africanity. And Du Bois, remember, was the first sociologist in the United States. He built sociology as an instrument of knowledge in the United States because he went to his communities. Anyone who has not read Urban Philadelphia, his book, Philadelphia Negro, should, because it teaches you the basics of sociological research. That's Du Bois. That's his contribution to American knowledge base. He went in every household in the place to capture that knowledge. So what I'm saying, to connect back to your question, is that it is critical that we put things in focus and in historical sense, that the environment today is affected by the history from which we came, and now we're going back to where the origin of African knowledge was utilized. Every technologically rich billionaire has gone to Africa to extract things. I need to say something here, because you should not let the Africans free. They played a role in destroying their own economies. Okay. The moment you engage in mercantile economy, which also includes bodies, including your own bodies, then you are environmentally destructive. So the Africans have much to be blamed for, and to recognize today they're doing the same thing by selling the land to the best bidder. And that is the technology.
I'd like to stick, and in just a moment, we're going to actually open it up for questions from the audience. So if you have questions, please do prepare them. There's a microphone here in the middle of the room for those who would like to add your questions to the conversation. I want to stick with this theme for just a moment, Professor Chikole, if we can. This week, as part of the commemoration of the International Day of Remembrance of the victims of slavery and the transatlantic slave trade, Ghana's President John Dramani Mahama successfully led the UN General Assembly in a vote to pass a resolution that declared the trafficking of enslaved Africans and racialized chattel enslavement of Africans as the gravest crime against humanity. That should have a round of applause. I'm sorry. Yes, okay, just checking. And this was truly a significant step in the ongoing international discussion as it pertains to historical justice, recognition, and reparatory efforts. And as part of that effort, he traveled the world. Many of you may have seen him going throughout South America, Caribbean America, all throughout the continent of Africa to gather up support for this resolution. As the three of you, and this is a question open to either of you, but as you think about the way that African literacies and authors have in the past and continue to bridge those gaps, Professor Chikole, you noted the role that people of African heritage played in the destruction of the relationship between people of African heritage, such that it helped in some way to contribute to the transatlantic trafficking of African people. Currently, there is a vibrant discussion happening in various parts of the African American community about that very thing, about this idea about connection to home. There are a number of folks who feel quite passionately about the hurt that those ancestors may have played in the transatlantic trade. There are others who are talking about the way that Pan-Africanism can really help to unify and build bridges across the different branches of the Pan-African diaspora. Professor Perry, I didn't know if you had a response also. I saw you earlier. I didn't know. I wanted to give you an opportunity to respond to the previous question as well. But I'd like, if you could, to talk with us about the way in which we, as the inheritors of this great legacy, should be considering what it looks like to have authorship, to have artisans, people who are part of the culture work, to help us to think about what the complexities of those relationships were historically, how they interplay with how we connect with each other today, and what possibilities can you imagine us moving forward into as we consider this effort at reunification, of bringing back the Pan-African diaspora, such that we're addressing some of the themes that you raised, Professor Chikole, and thinking about how to never allow those sorts of disruptions to happen again.
Yeah, I mean, I will say I'm always very cautious about reading backwards in too simplistic a fashion, right? So, so with the formulation, and I write about this, so the formulation that, Africans sold each other is predicated, I think, in ways that we don't always fully acknowledge on a conception of race that did not exist when the transatlantic slave trade began.
Can you tease those distinctions out
Yeah,
for us
so Africa as a continent is a concept imposed from out externally, right? And so there are all these peoples, right? The most genetically diverse continent, all these peoples with different kinds of social structures, different kinds of economic structures. And so to be placed under a banner of race, right, is something that happens as a consequence of, the destruction of European empires, right? So we have to, but then the question becomes, I think that one of the things that's extraordinary is that out of that we still continue to create ourselves, right, and to make something meaningful of that which was imposed as a degradation, right? So I don't want to suggest that I'm not a person who's like race doesn't exist, right, or that we should abandon it. No, we make something of it, and I personally identify as a Pan-Africanist, but I know that there are a wide range of different kinds of political ideas. I will say that there's a couple of things, though, that have been said that I think are really important for this point. One is the use of the term continuity. And I was thinking about, and this is just indulge me for a second, but the moment I was thinking about, when you were talking about Ann Spencer, I'm writing about Sterling Brown, and also about Lucille Clifton. I'm writing about Sterling Brown now, and Sterling Brown is mentored by Ann Spencer, and teaches Lucille Clifton, right? And this idea of this sort of continuities and that garden. And Sterling Brown wrote poems about Ann Spencer in that garden, and I am part of what I've been writing is about, he learns about how to nurture community from the model of the home that she created in Lynchburg. And also to the point, I can remember being 18 years old and starting college, planning to be a math major, walking into a lecture on Peter Wood's Black Majority, where the professor's talking about how the Senegambian rice cultivation techniques allowed for the Carolina colony to survive, right. And even as a young person who had been immersed in Black culture and ideas and literature, at that moment, I realized I had not been taught to think of the Africans who were stolen and brought to this country in terms of the knowledge they possess. I had not been taught, and so part of the question I think of, and this also goes again back to this point that Camille made about naming something, like part of what the task is to think about what is the language for what we know about these traditions that we need to approach the current moment. So maybe the word is not going to be Pan-Africanist, right? Maybe it's going to be a different word, but that we need language for continuities where we can see each other, and we see each other not just in terms of kind of a phenotype, but a history and a tradition of actually of knowledge and self-creation in the face of deficit, and also reclaiming our land and our people. So I think that there's the simultaneous sort of responsibility of maintaining awareness of continuities, or the tradition, as we might name it, of naming the ancestors correctly, right? And also thinking about, in that process, what do we need in order to move forward in the present moment. And history is comprised of billions of facts. We tell history because we have certain commitments and values. And so the question is, what are our commitments and values at present, and how do those present commitments and values animate how we describe, how we name, how we tell the stories of the past with an right? We can't tell everything. What are we choosing to tell that is going to arm us to move forward? That seems to me to be the question.
So my final question, and I'm looking to see if we have any questions from the audience as well. In light of the way America is Americaning right now, and the policies and the decisions that are being made, we are seemingly headed towards a moment of artificially created resource scarcity, or at least scarcity in our ability to access certain resources. Those very same resources which are needed for data centers, for example, the minerals that are required, the helium and the minerals that come through various portions of the world that are no longer accessible mainly to Americans. It is reshaping international relationships, and for those of you who wonder where I'm talking about the war, okay, I'm talking about the war in Iran. Reshaping international relationships, reshaping relationships with currency, reshaping relationships with access, and it occurred to me in the course of a series of conversations I was having with a number of other scholars that wouldn't it be something if American hubris were what led us to a space where the ability to access the minerals that are destroying the planet in pursuit of surveillance, we're no longer able to access, the American leadership government is no longer able to access because of the hubris that's guiding the current moment. To the extent that thought experiment leads us to a reality where oil becomes scarce due to artificial creation, where our ability to access those materials for these technologies becomes somewhat limited, I wonder, is there a space for imagining our world being one such that we are now going to be forced to return to a more, I don't want to say simple relationship with the land, but being forced to rely more on each other in terms of community, relationship to the land, because of the inability to continue operating the way we traditionally have when it comes to consumption. I wonder if that is something that you contemplate, and if so, what sorts of writings would you encourage the next generation to consider to help us imagine and envision what that world can look like?
Well, all praise Octavia Butler.
Oh, yeah.
But
Yes.
But don't stop at parable of the sower.
That's right.
Right? Because if you stop at parable of the sower, you stop. It takes a while, but you got it. But you'll get to a hopeful moment.
Right.
But you have to go on to the parable of the talents.
That's right.
And it gets complicated all over again.
That's right.
And we've done this. None of this is new. We were about to run out of enough whales. And oh my gosh, how are we going to light our homes? No whales to be found. And then we find petroleum oil. And then we're about to run out of petroleum oil in the U.S. And then we find natural gas. We don't have a shortage of natural gas.
Yeah.
That's not a problem. It is a problem. But the shortage of natural gas in the continental United States is not an issue. But each time those resources that humans are so rapacious for start to get depleted, human ingenuity finds a new thing to rape and pillage and create a new form of destruction. So yes, I do think that this moment that we have is forcing a new direction. I do think we're going to see a whole lot more small-scale gardening this summer because we've all seen the price of eggs, right? We know that these things are expensive, and there are ways to sustain ourselves, and that's great. And also, what's the next thing?
Right.
So I feel like one of the spaces for the human imagination is to not just imagine the solutions, but actually imagine what the next problem is that we're going to create for ourselves. Wow. And what the solutions for that next set of problems might be. Because there have been enough people in my world who've been calling the concern about AI and water issues. That's not a new concern. It's a new concern as a loudly described issue, right? And so from the start of when we say, hey, that seems like a possible positive solution, but let's just spitball some of the negative consequences and how can we rein those in. I think that's one of the things that's necessary of us, because there's no moment in history that we haven't solved our own problem by creating another one, right? So maybe that's our charge, right? Maybe that's one of our charges now, is trying to stop that cycle.
Ashe. Let's turn now to the audience. Any questions from the audience? Burning question, passionate question. It's a safe space. Go right ahead.
Thank you for this thought-provoking panel. And just when Professor Perry was talking, my mind just kept going back to this. You know, home is where your dead are buried, sort of this juxtaposition of where your dead are and the creativity and, you know, the home of the South. But I'm Haitian American. I can't go home right now. What about our other people from the diaspora? If they don't know their history, they don't know where they're from, they can't go home. How do you cultivate that creativity, that sense, that connection with that land? You know, I hope, you know, things in Haiti, for instance, do go home, but how do you do that when you cannot go home anymore? I think about my father, like his dead are buried there, but he hasn't gone home, and what that might do to you. Just curious.
Yeah, I mean, and I've been thinking about this question because, so my last book begins in my grandmother's home in her bedroom. It's about blue, and the night before the launch of that book, that home burned to the ground. That's was my first. No one was living there right then, so everybody was safe. It was total lost. And that's my first home, the only place I ever referred to as home. And so for the first, first it was just an extreme, I was grieving a home, and we had just lost, while I was writing the book, 2 of my cousins had passed, men in their 50s, heart as happens so often with black men. And then the loss of the place where we had gathered and lived. And so I was like, well, now the home is in the book, right? And the book becomes a way of maintaining tradition. And the home burned to the ground, because that's what happens in poor black communities. Homes, where people don't have the same, the kind of resources to maintain them. There's, not the appropriate resources that have been placed. So the fire, this was not the first fire that had taken a family home, the only one that I had experienced. So there's something about the violence of these historic forces that are connected to empire and white supremacy that make it so that we lose homes in multiple ways. And so I think those stories, or that's other places where we keep home. If it's not the space, it becomes in the transfer of stories, or it becomes in the way that we maintain tradition. Or for me, it was going home, not to that home, but to my cousin's home over Christmas, and him giving me a cutting from my grandmother's last plant. She died 17 years ago. And he gave me a cutting, and his plant came from a cutting, and so then I carried the cutting back from the South back to Massachusetts with me, and it grew, and now it's a flourishing plant in the last couple. And for me, it's real, it's material, but it's also a metaphor for how we rebuild when we lose so many homes.
But I just, as somebody from the Southern diaspora, just want to add that for many of us, there is no, first of all, there's no going back to Mississippi. I can't go back to the part of Mississippi my grandfather's from. He wouldn't go back to the part for very clear reasons. But also, where was the from before that, right? So that this answer of what it means to be Black American is partially about a very calculated robbing of genetic, cultural, ethnic, national ties from wherever on the continent our peoples are from. And so I look at Black faces in America and I'm like, I don't know, is that a Fulani face? Is that an Igbo face? I don't know, but somebody does, right? Somebody knows what these facial structures or where that teeth gap comes from, but we don't get that information. Maybe if you sell your DNA code to 23andMe, you can get a little bit of it, but there's something specific about the Black American tradition that is constantly requiring a rewiring of the answer of what home is and what home can be. And to me, one of the answers is to put that onto the living world so that my home is wherever life is growing that I can connect with. There are particular kinds of trees that are my kind of trees. There's particular kinds of birds and flowers that speak to me in a way that I understand as connected to what I want to name as home. And so that is, for some of us, a way to rewrite this whole concept of what home can be and make it much vaster than an individual house or street or state or town.
I think in some ways, Professor Chacol, what you had noted earlier about almost a foreign tradition that many in Black America have as almost an existence that is in separation. And when we aren't tied to the land, for so many of us, our beginning is here. And I believe it was John Henry Clark who talked about the fact that when your history begins in enslavement, everything that comes after is an improvement. And it is, I think, a trick of colonialism and the colonialization of the mind that we begin our time in this space without remembering that we have millennia upon millennia upon millennia of additional ancestors who never experienced the Ma'afa traumas that we can also call on. And for so many of us, we call on the ancestors here and forget that we have thousands upon years of history and ancestral memory, legacy, and power to also draw from. And I think I'm just encouraged now to even more name that so that we're reminded that home and where our dead are buried is not physically locked into this space. Professor Chacol, were you going to respond as well?
Two things I want to say in our discussion. One, is one of the things that attracted me to come to the United States in 1970. I was going to say, one of the things that attracted me to come to the United States in 1971 to seek education, higher education, is the history of African Americans in the struggle to survive and grow. That was the time when I saw the civil rights movement making a point. That was the time when I saw people like George Jackson and Angela Davis speak to larger issues. And I said, wow, there is something going on there. Yeah. You know, these are the only people around the world of color that I know who are standing their ground. Now, doesn't mean we didn't have things going on in Africa or other places, but that was the most visible one. So I was attracted to that. I said, there's something I can learn from here. So since 71, I've made my home here, whether I like it or not. It is difficult for me to even now, on the base of the political situation, like our Haitian sister, for me even to say I'll go back. Yeah. My children here, my wife is here, she is an African American, my children are African American, so I cannot transform them to a different place. There's something very interesting, which is similar to what Imani was saying, that when families give something to other families for continuity basis, when my in-laws passed away in Detroit, my brother-in-law gathered that is in house, and in his house he gave us a plant for all those who were there. That plant is still in our house and in our neighborhood because we keep sharing it with other people. We keep sharing it with other friends. So to me, I'm connected through that plant to my mother-in-law, to my father-in-law, and the other family members that was there. It's a very critical point. So where we are is where we stand our ground. I'm not going to say, let's all go back to Africa. You know, it's not a possibility. We have to fight in this ground, in this place, for justice, for equity, and for our pure identity.
Yes, please.
I have a question for Kasahun. Can you? Africa World Press and the Red Sea Press, I noticed, has published books on the environment and sustainability. And I was wondering if there's any that stand out for you that you would want to share with the audience, any particular ones that you would recommend?
Let me introduce my wife to all of you. That's Professor Ayo Ogletree. She is right. From the beginning, we have published books on the environment, particularly when the issue of biodiversity came up. And Zimbabwean scholars and Kenyan scholars were dealing with this issue. So we've dealt in collaboration with American scholars in Arizona, in particular. We're also dealing with the same problem. Zimbabwean, Arkansas scholars jointly working on biodiversity. We've done quite a number of books in there. But it was not a conscious activity. It needs to grow more. I want to add one more point. That is, if we look at the totality of African people, someone here said, we are the majority. It's more than that. We are the world. There is no part of the world that is not made out of Africa. Whether you call yourself black or you're... When did the Irish begin to call themselves white? Or the Italian? Or the Jew? Or that's just new phenomenon that was compared by empire. But their basis is Africa. Except they have gone back to rape Africa in many ways, and they continue to do the same thing over and over again. So the construct of black and white, you and I know, it is a social construct. It's not based on reality. It's not based in our history. Right? So, as I said before, we have to look at our young people. Africa is 70% young. Can you imagine what the next generation of inventors, creators, writers, thinkers are almost frozen there for the moment. But when they rise up, as they do, it will be a different story. It's a different story. So I am hopeful that this environment will change because our young people will make us change.
That's what we call a mic drop moment. Let's give our panel a warm round of applause. We can do better than that. This has been a riveting conversation.